If you enjoy, consider liking and subscribing to stay up to date with my latest videos. Without further ado, I'm an Uber driver. Dealing with colorful customers is part of the job, but the guy I picked up last night really took the cake. Being an Uber driver was not a career choice. It wasn't something I wanted to do long term. It was just a means of making money, and considering the current climate, I needed it. I lived alone and I didn't really have that many friends. I was pretty lonely. Don't get me wrong, I enjoyed my own company, but there's a stark difference in being alone and feeling lonely. I figured picking up random strangers in my car every night would alleviate that loneliness in a way. My clientele varied day to day, but a lot of my passengers were inebriated, rowdy, and excreting bodily fluids I didn't even know existed. I found myself cleaning up vomit more times than I would have liked. But it wasn't always the case. I wasn't much of a talker, so I never struck up a conversation with any of my customers, save for asking them what their name was and where they were going to confirm I had collected the right person. I found that most of the people I chauffeured preferred it that way. You'll find that people always yearn for an ear to chew off. Everyone wants to be heard, even if it's by their Uber driver. I guess people may view it as a form of therapy, detailing your problems to someone who doesn't know you and may offer an unbiased opinion, should you need it. That's how I looked at it anyway. That's not what I'm here to talk about, though. I'm not here to disclose the things that people shared with me. Those stories are irrelevant, and it isn't my place to do that. I'm here to tell a different story. I'm here to tell a story that I cannot explain, a terrifying and haunting encounter. Now, I will start this off by saying that I never once felt threatened whilst doing this job. I had never felt fear, nor had I ever felt like my life was at risk. Mostly, the job was just that, a job, uneventful and ordinary, until that night. I had started work around 8 p.m. that evening, and I remember it being fairly quiet with not many requests. After about an hour, I was just about ready to head back when my phone started to ping. I perused at the request and decided that I was going to do this last job before heading home. The pickup and destination were not that far between, so I figured it would take me 20 minutes to do the trip. When I pulled up, the street was eerily silent, which was quite unusual for that time of night. It was only 9:15 p.m., so the stillness was peculiar. It made me feel somewhat uneasy, but I shoved those feelings aside, deeming them ridiculous and unnecessary. I observed the old house that stood before me. It looked really old, older than any house I had seen before. Its shadowy and vast presence was menacing, and I remember my heart rate elevating as I sat, waiting. I took a deep breath and calmed myself down. It's just a house, I thought to myself and chuckled. The front door opened and I found myself holding my breath as I watched the figure step out into the night. It was a man wearing an ill-fitted gray suit that draped over him like a curtain, loose and flowy. His face was partially obscured by a cap, and all I could see was his mouth, which appeared to be curled into a small smile, thinning his lips. He looked odd. That's the best way I could describe it. There was just something slightly off about the way he looked, and I couldn't quite place my finger on it. I thought perhaps it was the suit and cap combination, the utter strangeness of it, but it was more than that. His whole persona just gave me the creeps, even down to the way he walked. As he approached my car, I noted he walked with a slight limp which made him drag his left leg. But even as he put one foot in front of the other, I noticed the odd way in which he was moving his body, stunted and robotic. You could say he resembled a child that was just learning to walk. He stopped in front of my car and made no attempt to get in. I looked up at him and saw the small smile lining his lips. It wasn't menacing, but it was definitely fucking creepy. I could see the side of his mouth quivering as he stood there unmoving. Against my better judgment, I rolled down the window and spoke. "Hey mate, you ordered an Uber?" I asked. I watched as the man's entire body stiffened at the sound of my voice. He tilted his head toward me and nodded slightly. I still couldn't see his face. "All right, hop in," I said, attempting to make my voice sound as cheerful as I could. The man slowly opened the door of the passenger seat and climbed in. As soon as he shut the door, I felt the air in the car change. It became thick, blistering, and almost unbreathable. I rolled down my window and took a lungful of air before pulling out into the quiet road. I wanted to get to his destination as fast as possible. We drove in silence for a while, and I had almost forgotten that eerie and uncomfortable feeling. I checked my phone, and according to the sat-nav on the Uber app, we were 10 minutes out. I looked around, and that was when my heart sank. We hadn't left the street. What the fuck? I muttered to myself. Had I just driven around in a circle and not realized? I looked in the interior rearview mirror and saw the man staring back at me. His eyes were still obscured by the cap, but I knew he was looking right at me. His mouth still bore that slight smile, only this time it seemed a little wider. His skin was the color of ash, sullen and thin like moistened paper. It looked like it would rip at the slightest touch. Maybe there was a simple explanation for why we were still on the same street. Maybe I had gone in a circle without realizing. Sometimes these roads all look the same. I moved off and made sure that I turned the left corner this time. We drove for about 5 minutes before I saw the house again. Was this some kind of prank, I thought? I was beginning to sweat profusely, and I could feel my heart beat against my chest like a drum. I stopped the car and got out. The street was eerily silent, devoid of any signs of life. It was as if the world had frozen in time. The unnerving atmosphere sent shivers down my spine, and I became increasingly anxious to get away. As I turned around, my heart sank to see that the man had also gotten out of my car. He stood on the other side, his eyes obscured from view, but I could sense his intense stare piercing through me. "Is this some kind of joke?" I asked him, hearing terror in my own voice. He didn't respond, just continued staring at me. Then his mouth began to quiver and twitch more violently, the sides jolting and trembling, forming a detestable, maniacal smile. It continued to stretch from ear to ear, growing wider and wider. It was impossible, and yet it continued to get bigger, exposing his crooked, discolored teeth. I watched as the skin around his mouth grew taut, slowly ripping at the sides like the seams on a frayed shirt. Droplets of blood trickled down, saturating his teeth. The smile continued to grow, distorting the features on his face. "What do you want from me?" I managed to say. "Look into my eyes." I'd never seen anyone move so fast. He scampered towards me, his limbs splaying from one side to another, moving in an unnatural fashion. He looked like a puppet being controlled by a maniac you couldn't see. I looked at his face, his smile never once left his crimson-colored lips. It had now extended to the back of his head all the way around. "Look into my eyes," he said again, crawling towards me on all fours. I stepped back hastily, reluctant to take my eyes off him. I scanned my surroundings, frantically searching for a way out, but there seemed to be none. Darkness enveloped me from all sides, and a sense of dread and hopelessness gnawed at my insides. Was I going to die here? "Just look into my eyes. I promise everything will be okay after you look," he said. I looked at him, and that was when I knew. I never wanted to know what his eyes looked like. I knew that something awful was going to happen to me if I did. "Look into my eyes, look into my eyes, look into my eyes, look into my eyes, look into my eyes." He kept repeating it over and over. His mouth grew impossibly large, the jaw scraping and dragging across the floor as he spoke. His tongue slithered out aimlessly like the tongue of a snake. It flicked from side to side, speckles of bloodied spit flew across the ground, staining my shoes. As he slowly rose to his feet, his jaw returned to its normal position, but his sickening smile remained. His face appeared deflated like a balloon, marked by deep creases and folds. It was the first time I could clearly see his features. He lifted his left arm, which appeared skeletal and dry, to remove his cap. "Look into my eyes," he repeated, his voice barely audible but firm and demanding. He removed his cap, revealing his full face. My heart raced so fast I thought it might burst out of my chest. "Now you will see," he groaned. That was enough for me. I ran back to my car as fast as I could with my eyes closed. I knew I had to get away, and I wasn't sure if I could leave this road, but I had to try. Once in the car, I avoided the rearview mirror at all costs and pressed the gas pedal as hard as I could, feeling the car roar to life. I drove for miles until I was sure I had escaped. I still don't know what that man was or what he wanted from me. But one thing is certain, I quit my job as an Uber driver the very next day. Ever since that night, I've been struggling to sleep. I can't tell if it's the crippling anxiety of what I experienced or the fear of falling asleep. Every night when I close my eyes, I can hear a faint whisper, hauntingly gentle but disturbingly determined. "You did as I asked, and now there's no turning back."